Hello all and welcome back to One Spooked Professor. If you can't tell, I'm using a new mic this time, so there'll probably be a different sound. My old one broke. So welcome replacement. Today's episode is going to focus on murder as a form of establishing character. And this idea came from a podcast episode I was doing on Mortal Kombat, where I looked at how the game series developed its characters through their use of fatalities. And horror does a lot of the same thing when you stop and ponder it. I suppose that's why they use a lot of horror DLC characters in that game. There is a bit of a connection. But I decided to take that idea and run with it in this horror-focused podcast to look at how characterization is handled in horror works that involve a whole lot of bloodshed. How and why and what a person kills often tells you a lot about that person. Shocker. Everything we do in life shows who we are. Am I able to stick to my diet, or do I go for the French fries at every opportunity? Am I able to stay off that Pepsi, or am I swigging it in the background? I am totally not staying off that Pepsi. I will give up that Pepsi when pigs fly. Okay, some pigs are in the air. But I'm still not giving up on Pepsi. Maybe you're someone who chides women for getting an abortion, and the moment you find yourself in a rough patch, you get an abortion yourself. What does that show about your character? What do our actions in life demonstrate about us? Now, since storytelling involves the more interesting parts of life, life with the boring parts cut out, naturally we're going to be looking at some of the most defining actions of a person's life. This includes things like murder. After all, if murder is not a big deal in your life, I've got to wonder just what on earth your daily life is like. And no, this is not a podcast advocating for murder or anything like that. We are studying how it is represented in fiction, specifically horror fiction, though we're going to look at a few non-horror examples because Alfred Hitchcock has a lot to say on this subject, and I use Alfred Hitchcock off and on throughout this podcast, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. He certainly influenced horror a great deal. Still, Alfred Hitchcock is the master of suspense, not the master of horror, considering he made thrillers, not horror movies. Jumping back to this idea of characterization, there are two forms of characterization: direct and indirect. Direct characterization is told directly to us, hence the name direct characterization. We are so sneaky with those names. So if I told you, hey, do you see that guy who walked into the room? He kicked puppies. He shot at cats with a BB gun. And he poisoned guppies when he's done. I suppose he's the dentist from Little Shop of Horrors. So I tell you all of those things, and you might go, oh my gosh, he's horrible. But you haven't seen any of that yourself. You just have my word to go on. But if the first thing he does when he walks into the room is help a handicapped person to their seat, gets up and then tells us, hey, I'm collecting for this charity, and then we sneakily follow him to make sure that he's doing the right thing with the money and he does what he said he did, meanwhile petting a cat that he was supposed to shoot at in that previous statement instead of hurting it at all, you're going to go, either this guy's not showing his ugly side, or maybe that gossip was BS. What someone does and shows us while we're looking at them is usually more impactful than what we're told about them. What we're shown is indirect characterization. If you've ever heard any lecture on writing, virtually everyone says, show, don't tell. Why? It's more powerful. And what shows a character's personality more than an action that affects others on a deep level? This is why people go gaga about the big events in movies or our lives. When someone cheats on someone or lies and gives a big whopper, not just, oh, you don't look fat in that dress, oh yes, the kid's totally yours. That's the kind of lie we're talking about, the life-defining lies. Or when we're talking about things like murder and torture, the actions that cross boundaries. Naturally, in horror, we're going to be dealing with a lot of the spicier forms of human action. Let's call it that. And when someone crosses these lines, they are doing so for a reason, and they handle it in a particular way. And the way they do this tells us a great deal about them. This goes for our villains and monsters as well as our heroes. Inconsistency will burn an audience, causing them to often react poorly, breaking that suspension of disbelief, that tacit agreement between author and audience that maintains the illusion of reality within a story. So internal consistency is key. And also, just as important, is how this characterization meshes up with what people know of life, not just what they know of the characters, especially if your aim is to get them to believe in that moment in the horror. But we're looking specifically at murder in this case, or levels of violence at the very least. How does a character enact violence? Why do they do so? And what does this tell us about that person? So here we are, developing character through murder. And I think any discussion of characterization and the action of murder must start with the why. Why does someone do it? This is usually the first question that pops into people's mind when they hear about true crime or they focus on a mystery. It's not only who done it, it's why did they do it. Indeed, as soon as a chase or manhunt ends and the police apprehend the murderer, immediately people go, well, why did they do it? Not just what did they do or who did it. We need some understanding of it. This need for closure also appears in fiction. We understand that people do things for a reason. And this brings us into one of the basic issues that some horror writers and movie directors and so on and so forth fail at completely. This is on why the monster or villain or even hero decides to kill. This isn't something that people do very lightly. There are levels of violence in people's lives. Not just physical violence, there are forms of social violence as well. There are ways to force your will upon someone. Lying is a form of social coercion. And how does a liar fare against someone who is abrasive, direct, and overbearing and willing to brush through their lies and just shout them down? They often fall apart. So you've created a sort of hierarchy of violence there in terms of social violence. The abrasive person is able to shout down that liar, but the abrasive person isn't necessarily going to be able to handle very well the person who's willing to use physical violence when the abrasive person is not willing to go to that level. And past the person who will use basic physical violence like shoving, pushing, and maybe punching is the person who will inflict serious harm, willingly and knowingly, not just the person who does so accidentally. Then you've got the level of violence above that, the person who kills willingly, knowingly, whether in the heat of passion or planning it out. And even then, there's a different level of violence. Note that I'm smushing these levels together. They're much more detailed and intricate than I am demonstrating here. But there is a difference between a person who gets angry at seeing their spouse cheat and there's a hammer next to them and they just grab it in a fit of rage, than the person who found out their spouse has been cheating on them, so they slowly poison the spouse over the course of a few months, watching them grow weaker and weaker while they take care of them, and then eventually, while they're on their last breath, tell them, I know. That's just a whole different level. And some people are not capable of reaching certain levels without being pushed or deprived. This is an interesting facet of horror that makes it very useful in terms of revealing the ugly sides of human nature. This is why many morality tales involve horror, and even political thrillers and political allegories involve some horror elements as they display what people can be stripped down to. The person who is polite and eats only greens, is unwilling to hurt a rabbit, could conceivably be pushed to cutting off your finger with pruning shears. But under what circumstances? Why would a person go from A to Z in such a way? I'd mentioned earlier that this is where a lot of horror movie writers and horror book authors mess up. And that's because their monsters or killers just do things, and the reasons are not very well fleshed out, and people jump to the levels of force or violence the story requires, and not what they would in the context of their previous characterization and what we know about them do. Why does the alien kill in Ridley Scott's Alien? Well, it's actually fairly sensible. Their very reproductive cycle requires our destruction. So imagine the fact that all the drive that humans have to bone, this creature possesses to murder you, and you have already got a pretty serious drive in this thing to kill. Add on top of that, it is a predatory creature that sees us as prey. So even if it doesn't seek to reproduce with us, it will attempt to murder us. Why? We are possibly a foodstuff or a threat, and if we threaten its offspring, you've got all of mommy's anger laid up in there too. Add on to that is a creature with instincts, not something that seems to rationalize why it hurts people, and we understand its behavior quite a bit better. This is not a creature driven by greed, it is driven by biological impulses that, if you've seen Prometheus, stem from the fact that it is derived from a bioweapon, so its urge to destroy is ingrained in it. You're not going to be able to negotiate with this thing because the violence of murder is its norm. You are its prey, and you are possibly what it's going to parasitize to reproduce. Your destruction, should this thing win, is inevitable. If you understand that about this monster, then you can properly characterize it in your work. So long as it kills according to these purposes, we can comprehend it. Or at the very least, you can. The same could be said of Pamela Voorhees, the villain of the first Friday the 13th. Her reasons for killing make a great deal of sense. She's a bereaved, overprotective mother. Her son, Jason Voorhees, was born with hydrocephalus, which meant she had to take care of him a lot and was deeply fixated on him. Because she had to put so much effort into making sure he was okay, she pretty much devoted her whole life to him, which is why it's so catastrophic when he drowned, because the camp counselors were not watching him. Already, a mother losing her son is tragic, and we know that people aren't necessarily themselves after they lose a child. So it's believable that she would start to go over the edge a little bit, especially since there is a cultural belief that women tend to react less logically. You can see this in both Eastern and Western storytelling. And regardless of the fact that individuals react on an individual level, this belief is likely to be present in the audience. They're likely to, at the very least, be aware of this comprehension or understanding of how women deal with rage and loss, even if they don't hold to that belief themselves. They have experienced some cultural closeness with the idea. Anyway, loss can drive people to do things they would normally not. And what does she have to lose? Anger can also drive people pretty far, and she wanted revenge on the camp counselors for letting it happen. And she does kill 2 of them while they're having sex. Then the camp closes down, presumably with more sabotage from her. Although the murders themselves are pretty much good enough reason to close it down. Anyway, she returns in part due to grief and vengeance, but also a desire never to see anyone else hurt like her son was. Is this necessarily rational to a passerby? No. But is it believable from a grieving, angry mother who has probably lost her mind because her entire world ended when Jason died and she never filled it back up with anything healthy? Yeah, that's fairly believable. And look at how she kills people. She's not doing any of the things that Jason would later do that require super strength. She kills someone with an axe, with an arrowhead, and she was a working class woman who had to get her hands dirty, so presumably she has the strength to at least drag a body somewhere else. Add on to that she was a cook at the camp and thus knew the camp pretty well. She could shut down the power and do all sorts of other things that the plot required to move forward. And we can believe that she did all these things because the why makes sense with her actions. It gives her a solid reason for being the killer that we can build up to through the Chekhov's gun of information given to us about the kid that drowned. So that once the character's introduced, we can go, oh, well, it makes sense that she would be the bad guy. Got it. All of this stuff is coming together. Bad horror cannot even establish the consistency of the creature's behavior, or the villain's behavior, or even the hero's behavior. Let's take a look at some examples, and I'm going to pull one of them from a book I recently read that I got off of Audible because I like to read obscure and sometimes new horror works that are probably not going to be very good, but I hope they are. I've been pleasantly surprised by some of them. This was not a pleasant surprise. At least, not as far as the monster went. There were some redeeming features of the work, but I'm not going to get into a critical analysis of the work because that's not our purpose here. I'm using it to demonstrate the issues of why. I'm talking about a werewolf book by Ian McDermott, Lougarou, The Beast of Harmony Falls. It's the first of his Paranormal Investigator series. Why the beast is killing, we never find out. I suppose because it's got some links to some weird satanic cult thingy. It's never made clear. He just mentions a name, and I presume since it's a series that we're going to eventually have that organization turn out to be some big bad. But he hunts people, kills them, eats them because he is a several hundred-year-old French hunter who killed a werewolf in the past. Why is he hunting people now? Especially since he seems to be able to control himself as a werewolf and doesn't go crazy with the moon or anything? Dunno. Why does he live in the woods like he does? As far as I can tell, the only established reason for that is so he can stay off the grid because he's immortal. Alright, that little part checks out. It's very hard for an immortal to survive in today's hyper-textual and information-based society. But why kill people? Why cross that line? Especially since he was originally hunting a werewolf to protect people, I suppose? Or at the very least for money. I don't know. Nothing with his actions matches up to any sort of logical reasoning. Thus, he's just a monster there for the characters to kill, and who cares about that? Let's also look at another example. This one from film. We're going to be looking at the 2019 Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, a movie that has loose ties to the source material, though visually captured it rather well. Look at the villain, if you can call it that, the primary antagonistic force, that is Sarah Bellows, a girl who was tortured and imprisoned by her family because she tried to warn people that her family were poisoning the water in the town for money. She gets electroshock therapy as part of the cover-up, considering that they claim that she's insane. And, okay, she's eventually blamed for the mercury that caused the town's water to get poisoned anyway. Alright, this causes the misunderstanding and would lead us to think of her as the villain until we understand what she really went through. But what never really makes sense is why she attacks the other characters. There is apparently a legend that people would ask the crazy lady to tell them a story, that she would talk to kids through the window. And this would seem to indicate that her only positive interaction came through telling them scary stories that she came up with while in the dark. Scary stories to tell in the dark. Ha 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 ha. Yes, it's great. But why then would that turn to a willingness to hurt children who took her book and asked, "Tell me a story, Sarah"? That's apparently what you have to do to trigger the legend, but the legend doesn't make sense. At least the Headless Horseman has a reason to go hunting heads. He's missing his. He's a revenant. Why the kids, though? Doesn't make sense. If she were looking to punish her family or the descendants of her family, that would make sense. And apparently, all we have to do to stop her is to go, "Yes, we know you're hurting, but you can't hurt others too." Well, okay then, I'll just wail and be out of here. Guess you'll go look for your friends, which I'm not going to return. Why? What is the logical consistency here? Other than that she made up scary stories, and scary stories are what attack people. All right, beyond that, it doesn't work. It doesn't create a functional narrative. The very nature of the why makes the rest of the story broken from the get-go. And we could talk a lot about the nature of the director Guillermo del Toro and his tendency to favor style over substance, or how that movie was rather hodgepodge together. It was still very gorgeous. Guillermo del Toro has never made something boring, as far as I can tell. That's not what we're focused on here. We're focused on why characters kill. If the why doesn't work, the whole story doesn't work. This is not just central to how you make us believe a character. This is central to how you make us believe in their actions that shape the entire narrative. This is an issue that a lot of creators have, particularly when you deal with works that involve a crazy killer. I have actually worked with people who were writing stories, and I was acting as an editor for them, and one of them created a villain who was a cackle-mad stab people that he claimed was inspired by the Joker. And when I asked why this character does what she does, he went, "Well, because she's crazy." All right, why? Well, because she's crazy, and crazy people do crazy things. They act irrationally. No, they don't. Crazy people act quite rationally, according to what they perceive and how they think they should react to it. If you have hallucinations that make you see demons instead of people, you're probably going to react to those people really unpleasantly. Whether you're scared of them or you're going to try and kill them, your reaction to them, according to you and your hallucinations, actually makes a great deal of sense. I also pointed out to him that the very same character that he based this one on, the Joker, in this particular case the Christopher Nolan version, actually makes a great deal of sense. Most of what he does is pretty rational, considering what he wants to achieve. Prove the rest of the world is as ugly as he is. Teach the world a lesson. And he's got no moral compass, but he behaves arguably more reasonably than most of the people in the story. You can see a very blatant case of crazy people do crazy things because the author needs them to, or writer needs them to, in the BBC Sherlock with Moriarty. Is there necessarily always a reason for his actions? No, we just need this for drama. So what's our motivation here? He's crazy. Horror in particular is vulnerable to this because of the sheer amount of psycho killers and monsters that inhabit its pages. We are prone to thinking of those as just monsters or killers. Why does the killer kill? Because he does. No, a good horror movie killer has a very good reason for doing what they do, even if it's not a reason that we would necessarily applaud. To them, it makes a sort of sense. Freddy Krueger is a sadistic pedophile, and guess what? He wanted to go and be a sadistic pedophile. because that's what he enjoyed. He was a human being seeking pleasure. It's disgusting, it's evil, but we can believe it because disgusting and evil people tend to do that. And based on what he wanted from life, his attempting to go get it makes sense. Take a look at the graboids from Tremors. They are monsters from a different time period, the Precambrian period. They don't have any natural predators in our world. They also don't know what we are or what a car is. So their behavior makes a sort of sense based on how they used to hunt and their need to feed. It's like, I don't know what this species is, but I'll go and get it. They're an invasive species entering a new environment. So why they're killing things and why they're not showing traditional predatory fears? Well, they don't know these species. They don't know to be afraid. And they learn very quickly what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of, if you notice in the first film, before they get really dumb in later installments. A monster is not just a monster. Killer, not just a killer. Now that we've talked a little bit about why the why is so important, I want to look at who. Who does a person kill? This is almost as important as the why, and it will get us to our third question in a moment. Who would you be willing to kill? Don't tell me. I don't need to know. I would hope no one. I hope you're not wanting to hurt anyone in your life. But people who are motivated to kill generally don't just go, well, I'll just kill anyone because it's Tuesday. If a school shooter has been bullied his whole life, is he most likely to take it out on the people he perceives as his bullies? Or is he someone who will take it out on someone else because he's too afraid to stand up to his bullies? They scare him too much, so he needs to have power over someone else. This is the difference between a school shooter who goes after the kids at his school for bullying him and a school shooter who is tormented by his parents but won't lash out against them because he's too scared of them, so he instead goes after people his own age. His selection of the victim is linked to his why and tells us a lot more about him. This isn't a separate category from why with no connection. It builds upon it, evolves upon it, rebels, looks and feels human. They have a plan. Gosh, I feel very 2000s here. Who does Pamela Voorhees target? She targets camp counselors, teens having sex who are camp counselors, and the people who want to reopen the camp. Why? Because they make sense based on her reasoning. She wants revenge, and she wants the camp never to reopen. She has no reason to target some homeless guy in New York. If you're a female character who got raped by a group of men and left for dead, and then go out hunting those men with a six-shooter, we have some understanding of not just why, but who you're willing to kill. You're not going to kill some 6-year-old on a train. That's not a viable target to this character. If you have got a father who wants to avenge his daughter, well, he's going to look for the people responsible. And if he can't get to them, he might look for people who share qualities with them. He might go after all potential child murderers or all potential rapists. This can create categories of victims. This is again a part of that internal consistency of characterization that you should develop through showing instead of telling. How does Jigsaw show himself to be as a killer? Well, according to him, his motivation is to teach people to value their life. Okay, well, considering he is a cancer patient who is dying and isn't likely to live very long, that sense of loss could conceivably drive him to rage at the people who take life for granted. But even before the movies got really, really bad, we see some hypocrisy in his actions. Getting the girl on drugs to kill a guy, to not have her head snapped in half by a bear trap to show her what she's willing to do to survive and make her value her life, there's a bit of insane logic there. But punishing a man because he's having an affair, we're beginning to get outside the realm of rationality here. Maybe he's trying to show him, hey, value what you have, it may just go. Okay, there's still an internal consistency there, but is it more likely he wants to punish this man because he's his doctor and he doesn't give a frig? Is it more likely that this is also personal? What about the selection of the guy taking pictures of the affair? Again, this shows a bit of... This doesn't seem to just be about choosing people who he wants to teach a lesson to because they should value life. He picked this man because of his connection to the doctor and the case. There's more going on here. And then there's the question of the person he blackmails to play the game. Why does he pick him? Because he's a loser? I don't know. While Jigsaw yells in the series that killing is distasteful, he actively kills people. Yes, sometimes he tricks them into killing themselves or puts them in situations where they can save themselves if they play his game. He is still an active force in their deaths, and sometimes there is very little chance for his victims. Their chance lays in the hands of someone else, the real target of Jigsaw's wrath or desire to impart wisdom. There's some serious cognitive dissonance here. The hypocrisy is a part of not just why Jigsaw kills. He's bitter and in many ways lashing out against the world. It's also about who he kills. He likes to target figures who have an almost palpable era of hubris. He's punishing the prideful out of rage and resentment, not just his desire at cruel pedagogy. And the list of who he's willing to kill is equally subjective. He targets a cheater. He targets a drug user. He targets a medical insurance salesperson. He targets, even after his death, many people he has judged on some personal level. Many of them have a direct connection to him or his legacy in some way. And even the people who take up his moniker do so on instructions from Jigsaw or for their own reasons, particularly the police officer who kills people without obeying the rules of the puzzle. Hence why. So when a victim dies of the game that he won, it flummoxes the cops as they go, this doesn't match the MO. And we as the audience should recognize as well that this doesn't match Jigsaw's of what? And that's going to bring us to our next category. What does the killer do to kill someone? Or how does the killer kill people? You can look at this as what or how. I prefer to say the what of the crime. It's probably simpler to say how. Either way, this also says a lot about a person. Picture two different scenes. Both involve the same premise. A sniper is looking through his scope at a target who he is about to kill. Sniper in scene 1 hesitates, takes a deep breath, a tear slides down his face, and he pulls the trigger. Take scene 2. Season 2 sees the sniper grin a little as he pulls the trigger and stays to watch the life leave the eyes of his target. They have both shot a guy from long range. They have both reacted in some way to what they are about to do before they kill the guy, and then there is an additional action on the part of the second sniper. He enjoys it and watches. I use this example to bring up the idea that we should not just look at the means someone uses, but how they act around the means, how they act before, how they act after, what they do to prepare for it, all of it can tell us a great deal about that character. Take a look at Jigsaw. He builds these elaborate traps to kill people. This shows a meticulous level of thought that fits well with his motives because of the length of time he sits and ruminates on the people he wants to kill and why he wants to kill them, his nature as a more cerebral character, and the physical limitations of his body. He's not the healthiest man in the world, so having him pull a Jason Voorhees doesn't really work. It allows him to reverse notions of power and turn them on the people who thought themselves safe. And even someone as smart as Jigsaw, who seems to be darn near omniscient by the middle of the series, can't do it on his own. This is where we get his followers, adherents, and other such things, as the means to kill people require a great deal of resources and thus also shape the story. The traps themselves, particularly in later films, tend to embody the nature of the lesson he is trying to impart, or his followers are trying to impart. And the police come upon these crime scenes afterwards because Jigsaw doesn't clean up. Why doesn't he do that? Well, I guess you could say on some level it's a practical issue, but the bodies being left out for people to find is something of a statement. And when you consider the fact that Jigsaw thinks he has lessons to teach the world, why not let the audience discover the aftermath of the lesson? Why not let the people who are smaller than him and more foolish learn from the greatness that is Jigsaw? In a way, his means demonstrate his ego, which relates all the way back to the why and the who. He is playing God at the very end of the day, and all of these elements of how he kills and how he leaves the bodies after fit in with that, at the very least, most of the time. And even the inconsistency of his reasoning makes sense when you stop and think about the fact that he's crazy, yes. But he is crazy because he is dying and he's lashing out at the world in bitter anger. And he's picking traits he doesn't like in specific individuals and punishing them for his own misfortunes. In the end, it is an angry, bitter man hiding behind the illusion of wisdom. Also, his whole leaving tapes behind makes sense because a lot of people who are dying fear ceasing to matter. Thus, he intends to create a legacy. And what sort of people does this legacy attract? The vulnerable and the twisted. How does the witch in The Conjuring kill? Well, her process is a little bit complicated, and it gets laid out fairly early on in the film when we meet the two researchers in that classroom. How does the possession work? Well, the entity has to gain strength through creating fear, and eventually it will prey on the weakest member of the family, possess them, and then enact its evil schemes. This is exactly how the witch operates. She is able to manifest at first in small ways and then grow more potent over time as she seems to draw power from the fear that she creates. Then eventually the mother, who is worn down by the move and the constant terror, proves vulnerable to possession. This also fits with who the witch was. She was a mother who murdered her child. And we've got our who here in the midst of the how. We know she'd select the mother because that's the role that she played. She's going to reenact the murder by trying to kill the children, just like she did when she was alive. All right? These two are fitting together. And why? Because she worships Satan and wants to honor him. She's got her motive, she's got the means, and she intends to execute them. We have got our why she's going to do it, who she's going to kill, and how she's going to do it. What means is she going to use? This is why the little scares at the beginning, which don't seem to necessarily make all that much sense. Why would a ghost waste all its time scaring people when its real goal is to kill? I mean, you've got the whole reason that a filmmaker would have in their head of, well, we need to build up tension before we start going after kids with a scary witch ghost. But when it comes to people's motivations, what would stop them from immediately going and getting what they want? What delays gratification? In this case, the witch wasn't strong enough. She could kill a dog, maybe some birds, but that's not the same as possessing a person. She had to work them up to that level of vulnerability. And specifically, she had to work the mother there because to reenact her whole murder the kids plan to honor Satan, that's how it had to go. When this is badly executed, the means, the how and the what going on here don't necessarily match up with the why and the who. Let's take a look at season 2 of Slasher. Now, spoilers here for people who haven't seen this little Netflix horror show. But a group of young people who used to work at a camp as counselors end up returning to the site of the killing, which is now a commune, in order to dispose of the body. Well, the body is gone, and they think someone's onto them and killing them for revenge. Meanwhile, that same person seems to be killing people at the commune. Well, why kill people at the commune? They don't seem to have anything to do with the original murder, and everyone assumes this original murder is why people are getting killed. Well, yes and no. By, I think, episode 2 or 3, I can't remember which one, you learn that the people at the commune did discover the body, but didn't report it because the person running it intended to sell the commune, and he didn't want the property values to go down or for it to become impossible to sell or something of that nature. They covered it up too. So there is a shared connection here. However, they didn't necessarily kill the person themselves, so why are they being hunted too? Why does the same level of vengeance apply? And of course, there's a red herring in the form of a criminal who is also at the commune. But slowly, everyone starts getting whittled down, and we eventually learn that the person who is there for vengeance is a sick, disturbed lady at the commune who has been hallucinating her son the whole time. I mean, I think the man she was hallucinating was her son. Her reason for vengeance was definitely her son, because he was the person blamed for the original girl's killing. He was arrested and committed suicide in prison. Thus, her motivation to target these two groups makes sense. All right? Her son died in prison for a crime he did not commit. So the people who committed the crime, they needed to be punished, and the people who covered up the crime and made him wait in prison so long that he went crazy and killed himself, well, they also deserved to be punished. So it really wasn't about the girl's death, it was about the death of the person who was falsely accused of killing her. All right, so far so good. How does she go about killing people? Well, here's where we have a bit of a problem. They specifically, and by they I mean the creators of the show, go out of their way to depict this person as mousy, skinny, and full of issues. And believe me, she's got issues upon issues upon issues. But how does a person that size, that skinny, presumably with a history of, I guess, drug abuse in her past, manage to physically do all of the things that she did in the show? What's more, her locations don't always match up. Why is no one watching her? She's in one location at one point in time, then apparently can get away and get on the opposite side of this whole terrain to handle another issue. I mean, you must think she has some sort of magical teleporting power and strength when it comes right down to it. She kills a guy with an ogre. She kills another guy with a chainsaw. I was willing to give her the chainsaw because while she's lighter and smaller than the guy she killed, he was the only one who she thought was armed and he was the first one that had to go so that she could commit the rest of the killings. And tools can allow someone to conquer physical disadvantage. A 5'2" woman with a gun can still kill a 6'10" man who has an extra 100 pounds of muscle on her. No problem. A chainsaw, I suppose, can equal up that disparity as well, but I would think it would give away her location early. She somehow got it started right up and managed to kill the guy with it really quickly. When, if you've ever worked with a chainsaw, it is not that it's not that smooth of a job cutting anything thick, much less a person. And I can believe it from Leatherface because of how big Leatherface is. But how is this little woman capable of dragging someone bigger than her through a snowstorm, then cut out their eyes and tape their mouth shut and leave them in front of the place to be seen? I don't know. She manages to do so many things that seem beyond her physicality, and even uses tools that don't necessarily make sense under the circumstances in order to be visually cool, or to come out of nowhere, or to leave a great image behind, but don't necessarily make sense based on her body type. At the very least, the ending kill where she makes a guy hang himself like her son did, and she makes him hang himself, that works. Because she's not having to lift a guy larger than her, she's making him at gunpoint do this so that his friend can get away and they can end the cycle. She wins. Heads up. Through a lot of the killing, she does use tools that could give her the advantage. A gun at one point, a snowmobile, a chainsaw. But eventually I begin to wonder at the whole disparity of physicality. I get suspicious, especially since she can carry people long distances and can do so super quickly. The timing doesn't always add up. Compare this to Norman Bates in the thriller Psycho. When does he kill people? Where does he kill people? Who does he kill? Well, Norman Bates kills people as his mother. Relates to his whole psychosis. Not going to get into all of that here. Where does he kill them? Within the confines of his space, the hotel he owns. Why? He's got the home field advantage. This gives him the confidence and the knowledge to make his kills work. Yeah, a knife isn't that big of a physical advantage, especially for someone Bates's size and build. He looks fairly, let's just say it, he looks like a bit of a weenie. Like me. I am certainly not going to be going head-to-head with Goldberg anytime soon. The guy would play with me like a bath toy. But what does give Norman Bates the advantage? Well, he comes at people when they're not expecting him, when they're vulnerable, like on a stairwell or in a bathroom taking a shower, and he uses a lethal weapon, getting at least a few shots in while the person is still trying to react to the sudden out-of-nowhere attack. It is the home field advantage that really makes Norman Bates dangerous. Let's look at the how with monsters as well. A case of this done well can be seen in the action horror movie Predator, which kind of reminds me of the Most Dangerous Game, except with aliens. And the Predator, in many ways, is part of that movement of deconstructing the action movie and the action hero. Let's take a look at what the monster is and why it does what it does and who it does it to. The monster is an alien that goes on safari to other planets to hunt things for fun. So we've got the why down. It's a big game hunter here for its ego and the prize. It's not doing this for food, thus it's not going to look into that issue. It's also, because this is all about ego, going to target the meanest sons of bitches in the planet, which in this case would be our team of action heroes. led by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the first half of this movie goes on about like your average 80s action movie, full of bad one-liners, explosions, and people getting blown away. Then the Predator shows up and kills the first person. The guy is helpless to stop it. This member of a badass team, taken out in an instant. So suddenly we get an idea of the power disparity here. We also see the monster's ability. It comes out of nowhere to attack from stealth. It's physically stronger. It has interesting equipment on it. So it is on a technological level above its prey, and a physical level above its prey. And very quickly, it annihilates the largest, most dangerous member of the team, the man who wields the chain gun Old Painless, or minigun. What's more, after that you have that big scene where they blaze away into the jungle and hit nothing. So the movie delivers home the idea that against this enemy, force alone isn't going to work. The how the Predator kills is going to get them if they play the game as they have been playing it. And the Predator demonstrates it again and again and again until it gets whittled down to Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has to outthink the monster rather than outfight it. And the reason the monster doesn't kill him when it's got him cornered and he has no weapons is quite simple. Ego. You could also relate it to the Yautja honor code, but that seems to be more developed in the second movie. Ego could be just as good of a reason. So it's willing to fight someone as good as Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Dutch Schaefer, as he's called in this movie, because this is about manliness, or alienness, as the case may be. This is what leads to its defeat. But it makes sense based on why it does what it does and how it does what it does. It tends to only use advanced equipment when that is appropriate and the enemy is using advanced weaponry. When it comes to fistfights, it will meet you fist to fist. It uses an appropriate level of force against an appropriate opponent. Why? Because I guess it just wouldn't be fair otherwise. There's no sport in it. What's more, the imagery of these kills, the thing hunting people and mocking them and ripping its trophies out of them, give us a very good idea of what sort of person or alien this thing is, and can create a rather nice visual that's going to stick out in our minds. And hot our nightmares still wear 30. And it all fits nicely. Now let's jump to another monster. We're looking at the Anaconda from the film Anaconda. Now, if you consider Cerrone the villain, who is played by Jon Voight, you have a villain whose actions make sense. The monster in this film does not. We are led to believe that, unlike in Hunt for the Blood Orchid, the Anaconda here is a natural creature. And this presents an issue for the filmmakers who are trying to make a monster for it, because the way this anaconda behaves, moves, hunts, and kills is not at all like how the real animal does it. Yes, it is a constrictor. It does constrict its prey, but even what we see in the film does not match with how a constrictor would behave. Especially when it's pursuing its prey over land. The speed with which it moves, the way it moves its body, none of it matches up. There are entire videos of experts on reptiles pulling this film apart. Now, we generally give horror movies a bit of leeway. How many people are killed by wolves? Not very many. But we'll still watch a wolf movie. Same issue with a lot of killer animal movies. The movie makes the animal a lot more monstrous than it actually is, seeking to create a horror movie monster out of something natural that wouldn't behave this way. After all, what is it getting out of it? Predators, by nature, tend to be rather skittish because injury would impair their ability to hunt, and if their ability to hunt is in any way compromised, they're dead. So predators, while dangerous, often tend to be quite cautious, especially around things that they do not recognize. Hence our problem with the anaconda here. It's in its natural environment, and it should know most of the species it's dealing with, and the first one apparently preys on a pig early on. That anaconda shouldn't need to eat for a while, so why is it hunting these people? Don't know. Why does the anaconda chase them after eating one of them? It should be digesting that guy for a while. Again, don't know. It just is. About the only behavior the film gets right is its tendency to throw up food if it's stressed and needs to get away. In this case, though, it throws up Cerrone because it wants to chase and murder someone. Why? It's already got food and it was attracted by blood, not a desire for revenge. It went, monkey blood, what's here? Oh, got my guy, we're good. There was no need to chase anyone else. How the monster behaved does not mesh up with its motivation. It does not mesh up with what the film needed it to do. And it doesn't mesh up with the targets. These things would not see us as their natural prey, especially in an environment where it has prolifically available options. At best, it would want to get away from them because they're bothering it. Nothing in here worked based on what sort of predator it is. And you can see this in a lot of issues where you have monsters that spend a great deal of time and energy chasing someone, certainly more than they would get out of actually catching that person. Why would it do this? Could a snake even be physically capable of the things that we see in that movie? The how? No, it's not. And while we give it some suspension of disbelief, this one really pushes the boundaries. More so than some of the better animal monster movies like Jaws. Up until the end, we can pretty much believe in the shark until it is tearing the boat around it apart and climbing up on deck so it can eat Quint. I mean, there's no shark that would behave like that at all. But because we already are invested in that monster, we can still see it as threatening and believable under the circumstances. So again, the illusion is relatively well maintained. This illusion is directly linked to characterization. Do people behave believably? Do they react in a way that we could recognize as having a place in the world this film or book has constructed? Thus, these three aspects of why people kill, who they kill, and how they do it are key in creating a believably characterized killer. And I'd like to spend the last part of this lecture mentioning that the same applies to the hero. Why are we willing to accept the hero who kills? That's an important question as well. Why would we be okay with the good guy doing something we normally assign to the bad guy? Well, for one, we have many societally acceptable reasons to kill. Self-defense, the audience will generally accept. The defense of a loved one or family member, the audience will generally accept. The punishment of an evil force, again, we will generally accept. These sorts of things can be crafted into a highly rational reason to get rid of something. If you have a giant monster spider chasing you, it is reasonable for you to want to kill it before it can. And since the thing doesn't have a human form and thus we are less likely to sympathize with it, you have pretty much got a clear moral pass, especially when you consider the aversion most people have to that sort of critter, even in its small, harmless version, where it is helping you by killing off the things that could hurt you, like mosquitoes. There are still people that tend to kill them off. So it's quite believable that someone who's seen that giant spider attack its grandma would be willing to use violence against it. Now, what would make a housewife who has been beaten and abused by her husband for years and hasn't been willing to defend herself this entire time change to be willing to attack him or even kill him? Well, there's going to have to be some change in her perspective, some a new target, like, say, her child, or something else that shifts the narrative. You can see this in The Shining. What is it that makes the lead female character, and I'm going to work with the film version, willing to attack Jack? I mean, at the beginning of the film, she's kind of acknowledging his temper, especially to the therapist, but also explaining it away. Well, the level of violence surpasses what was previously expected, and she receives a lot of breadcrumbs to lead her to the conclusion that, okay, it's me or him, and he's crazy. This is not the man I knew. So she's able to make him less of a human being and more of a threat in her mind. Meanwhile, she escalates her behavior based on her early flight and then retaliation after she is pursued, which is actually rather common when it comes to how women in real life tend to use violence. There's some literature of this in true crime and in domestic violence cases. I would advise looking that up if you want to learn more about it. What's more, her son's life is in danger. This isn't the case of a drunk dad bending his arm so far that the arm breaks. This is a truly Looney Tunes dad coming after you and then going after your son, trying to kill him. It is fairly believable that she would react quite a bit more actively to this than simply be reduced to someone who sits there and screams. The same applies to anti-heroic figures like the Punisher and Quint in The Punisher and Jaws, respectively. For the Punisher, you have the death of his family at the hands of criminals. For Quint, you have his time on board the vessel that delivered the atomic bomb, and the whole bobbing around in the water with the sharks, and the whole trauma story he tells about it afterwards. All told in a particularly dramatic scene. This is one of the few times that the telling was very, very memorable. And it's probably a good thing that they told this rather than showed this through a flashback, because what happened occurred over the course of days and wouldn't have made for a dramatic scene so much as a dramatic full movie. So in this case, they told while showing the trauma in how the actor delivers the lines. But that motive lives on in his actions. And there we see a lot more of the showing done, especially when he breaks the radio and continues to pursue the shark basically until the boat is falling down around them. In the novel, he's a clear Captain Ahab XP who even dies the same way Captain Ahab does, pulled off his feet and into the water by his own harpoon and the rope attached to it. Anyway, I wanted to go into this so that you could see how the construction of effective murder-based stories goes, particularly as it links to a character and their motivation. I think I'm also going to do another killing-based episode where I talk about how effective horror movie death scenes are created, but I leave that for another time. I hope you all fare very, very well. Please avoid that killer lurking in the corner, and